Hi there, friends! Heather Ostera here, Media and Marketing Associate for the Western Stage. In this series, we'll be exploring the history of the Western Stage by talking to company members and alumni from seasons past. We'll be asking them to share their experiences and how their time at the Western Stage impacted their careers today. While many company members have come and gone over our 45-year history, we're making 2020 all about coming home. In this episode, we'll be talking to a few of the folks that followed John Solover to the Western Stage from San Jose State University. Let's dig in.
My name is Heather McAllister. I worked at the Western Stage. I'd like to think of myself primarily as an actor, but actually that's not true. I worked there in many different roles, and that kind of programmed how the rest of my career was going to play out, actually. Yeah, I worked doing a little bit of everything, and moving through my career, I've done all sorts of different things. Most recently, I got back into makeup and hair design, working with Santa Clara's Children's Theater. But I'm still doing film, and I'm just learning how to self-tape. And I just did the lead in 2 small personal narrative films that are going out, well, once we open things up again to the festival circuit.
My name is Kelly McAllister. For real this time. I worked at the Western Stage in 1988 on the main stage, doing musicals and also the very short play, Idiot's Delight. I also worked there in the summer and fall of 91 and 92, as well as 94. Mainly as an actor, I was in both the 92 and 94 versions of East of Eden. I also was Taft Miller's assistant for a while, reading his mail and things like that after he lost his eyesight. And I was one of many Master of Revels. We would take turns daily, sometimes nightly. Now I am mainly a playwright and a screenwriter and teacher of children's theater. I also direct around town, stuff like that. And I work teaching, writing also for adults at the Denver Center for Performing Arts here in Denver.
I am Jerry McAllister. I worked at the Western Stage from 1988 through 1991, and then I came back whenever it was that we did 8 by Dustin Lentz Black. I was primarily an actor, and then also was a directing fellow there, and I got to assistant direct or be assistant to the director, much like Dwight Schrute to John Solover, one of his productions of Peter Pan. And now I am a stage manager, a union stage manager, and I also do scenic arts, and I've been a production manager as well at a couple different theaters.
My name is Donna Federico. I started at the Western Stage in 1987, and I worked until 2006 at the Western Stage as a staff member, which means I got to act, direct. My main bread and butter job, as I call it, was designing the hair and the makeup for all of the shows, as well as mostly executing those designs. Then as I retired, and it was only semi-retirement, I became an actor at Liberty and was very pleased to come back almost every year, I believe, to the Western Stage to do at least one production with them. So I really haven't ever left.
Hi, I'm John, and I met the McAllisters and Donna at San Jose State University, where I did my graduate studies from 1986 to 1988, and we did lots of shows together in San Jose at San Jose State and also at City Lights Theater. And of course, Donna and I were classmates in the MFA program at San Jose State. And then, as they have said, the McAllisters and Donna, somehow, I don't know how, they found their way to the Western Stage in Salinas. And it just so happened that I was already there.
Okay, how did I first come to the Western Stage? I was just copying John. I knew John from San Jose State. He came in as an MFA student when I was an undergraduate, and I just recognized that this is a guy that I want to be like. He's, as you know, he's freaking talented and genius. So I followed him there to see shows he was working on, and then auditioned and failed and came back anyway and succeeded.
And what did you think about the Western stage?
Oh my gosh. I found it was exactly the kind of place I wanted to be. I had the freedom to create like our solo artist projects, to do my own works. I put together an improv group at lunch hour because they said, yeah, you can use the space. We're not doing anything with it. Go. You could do anything.
When I was 20 years old, I was an undeclared major at San Jose State University. And I met John Sulliver, and my brother and sister were already theater majors, and I was hanging out in theater a lot. And we started doing a bunch of shows together. Jerry had gotten hired in a production of All the King's Men, and Donna was already, I think Donna, you were already down there as well too. And John was like, you should come down. It was like, yeah. And auditioned, and I got on the main stage, and Jerry and Heather were in the studio. And that was a summer that also changed my life forever. And I learned all about a work ethic and a passion, and I just had to, and having the time of your life while doing it, and found that you could work hard and have a magnificent time.
I came to the Western stage because, like the McAllisters before me there, I was a colleague of John's. We were classmates at the in the grad department there. And I came to get my MFA later in life. I was already in my late 30s when I began. It came time for us to all decide where to go after we graduated. And John had been talking about the Western stage because he had been there during some of the summers that we knew him, and he would always talk about it. So of course, yes, we all decided to go and check it out. And I wanted so badly to find a theater I could call home, because again, it was in my late 30s. I was ready to settle down. I didn't want to be a gypsy, and there it was, like a silver platter. And so I auditioned, and like Jerry, I didn't get in that season. However, there was a big job opening for a hair and a makeup artist. So I decided, well, I want to work here. I will do that. I'm sure I'll be able to increase my skills later. And so I did. I accepted the job. And after that, I got wonderful, wonderful roles through the years there. I think it was Jerry so beautifully said, the camaraderie and the tolerance, the people we would bring in, who we knew wouldn't fit anywhere else, and yet they would come in and be embraced, and we'd find them something, and then they would be able to shine and find themselves there and be so comfortable there, and go on to do wonderful things. You know, I often used to say, yeah, we kept more kids out of jail than I.
In working with my brothers, who we as children made puppet shows in the living room, and we would hand out flyers to the neighborhood kids to come and act with us. So we always had that kind of a creative camaraderie in our interactings, and we were very much encouraged by our parents in that way. And John and Donna, meeting them at school, it was definitely kindred spirits, that they wanted to play and they wanted to learn things, and they weren't embarrassed to be smart. And so we ran to the Western stage, and here was this smorgasbord. You're going to learn how to do rapping in the children's tour of TWS, and you're going to drive at 7 in the morning. It's like, okay, but I learned how to do that. And I later did 2 national children's tours. Or working as the assistant director for Taft Miller in his production of The Crucible. Because of course I was devastated not to be cast in it, but that he selected me to be his assistant director, I felt so proud of that. And I was so excited. I remember specifically coming up with the voodoo research for the girls and getting to do a direct the scene where they're out in the woods preparing, and then 2 of them started to keel over from hyperventilating. It's like, okay, let's take this back. You've gone a little too far. But I love that I was encouraged just to dive in 1,000,000%.
The first season, I was Ruffian number 1 in Carousel, and I rocked it. I was also Soldier number 3, I think, in Idiot's Delight. I was number 4, and I spoke only in Italian, which I didn't speak. And then I was also, and then I was Max. I had one line, The Most Happy Fella, but our director was kind of intense, and she wanted us all to do these 4-page character bios. So I made this bio where he had syphilis and was insane and thought that everybody was giant rabbits, and he was on the run from the law because of some dirty pictures he had taken in San Francisco. And she was like, yes, good, keep it. And it was awesome. I was one of the pirates in Peter Pan. I was Liver Lips Louie and Guys and Dolls. And then I was the Pirate King in Pirates of Penzance. And then I was Lawrence Vale in Once in a Lifetime, which was very fun. And then I was Little John. I was Adam number 2 in East of Eden 92, as well as one of the baseball players. I was Cobra the catcher, one of the quartet in Damn Yankees that summer as well. And then in that fall, I was the Tin Man in Wizard of Oz. And then I wasn't there in 93, and then I came back and was Adam again in 94, as well as Pontius Pilate in Jesus Christ Superstar, and Andre in Three Sisters.
I remember one of the first ones that I got to do was All the King's Men, and John directed that. Jerry, everybody was in it. It was a wonderful, wonderful. I believe we did it on the main stage with the audience surrounding us almost all over. Oh, it was a wonderful production. Of course, I mean, it's too many, but I will give you my trifecta that I got to do. My goodness, I got to do Mama Rose in Gypsy, and I got to do Dolly in Hello Dolly, and Mame in Mame. And of course, that was my trifecta. I just love the fact that I can say I did all 3 of those.
Early roles that I played at the Western Stage were I was Tiny Duffy in John's production of All the King's Men. And then I was in the first production of The Good War, playing a young Nazi youth. And then when they did The Good War again, I played Sledgehammer Sledge, a real person, which was really cool. And then I also did Smee and Peter Pan that John directed. And oh my gosh, so many other things. And I did a couple of the children's tours, and I got to direct some of the scenes in the workshop version of East of Eden when they were first putting it together, which was such a thrill.
I remember being in The Foreigner, being a KKK member along with Jerry. And then I also remember very early on doing the children's tour of Quest. Summer after The Foreigner, we did The Nerd. I was Tansy in The Nerd. That was super fun. Also Grace in Bus Stop with a working stove. And one of the most fun things about that production was cooking the fried egg sandwich and serving it every night and knowing that people fought to eat it backstage. That made me very happy. And what else did I do? Judavine. I loved Judavine. That was a beautiful play. They had done it previously, but getting to be David and also the Ski Bunny was super fun. And I loved learning the Vermont dialect. And I think, what else? Mrs. Dainty Fidget in The Country Wife, throwing a little restoration comedy with, oh my God, the most gorgeous costumes ever. Super fun. One of the people I remember meeting and being absolutely terrified of was Taft Miller. He was so glamorous and looked always his gorgeous hair, and he always had this little scarf. And he was just the most down-to-earth guy you'd ever meet. But when you first meet him, he just had that kind of effect on me.
As well as Taft Miller, I share the greatest estimation. He was just a marvelous, marvelous human being and artist. But also Tom Humphrey. My God, if it weren't for Tom, I would never have graduated from college. He came to me one day, he said, Jerry, we're putting together a directing fellowship for you and a couple of the other artists here, and you have to go back to school and get your degree. And that's what you're doing in this fellowship. Like, well, do I have to do other stuff? Yeah, we're having some meetings and some classes. You're going to do those too, but you have to do that. I'm like, oh, okay. And yeah, so because of the Western Stage and Tom Humphrey in particular, I have a degree. Bachelor's degree. So that was astounding to me. As Lorenzo Aragon taught me to dance. I thought I was always a crappy dancer. He had me like leaping in the air, and it's like he'd point out, look, Jerry seems to float as he leaps. And I thought that I could stop gravity when I was leaping. So I guess I did. But it's and then I got to meet Ray Bradbury when he came by. We did his show, and that was just the coolest thing ever. We did Something Wicked This Way Comes, adaptation of his story, and I'm not sure how he came. They invited him to come and see the production, and he came. They had a big talk to us. This party is not for you. It's for Mr. Bradbury. Be on your best behavior. And we're like, yes, we'll be on our best behavior. And like Ray was like, what are you doing? Have a beer. Come here, talk to me. Here, sit by the fire. Let me talk to you about my ideas. I'm like, yes, thanks. And then he wanted to listen to our ideas, and it was just genuinely cool. It was, and then he wound up writing some stuff for us to do in the radio class. So I got to do a Ray Bradbury piece that was adapted just for us, which was, again, super special. It was one of his sci-fi stories.
Well, certainly Taft Miller and Joyce, who Taft in particular was one of the first people to really encourage me as a writer. His last words he ever said to me, actually, I called him when he was in the hospital, and Joyce was like, he can't talk. And she was like, what? Oh, okay. And he just yelled over from the hospital bed, keep writing. And that was it, which always stuck with me. And it was true, you know, and I have good friends that I've made through Western Stage besides John and Donna. And I even am still friends with Jerry and Heather, believe it or not. But like Jack Halpin and Greg Lennington, and often we would discuss when we went off to our other in New York or wherever, things that Tom or John or Taft or Joyce would say. Tracy and James Farmer, Carmen Borgia, I was thinking about him the other day, because he would do these amazing sound designs that just still blow me away when I think about them. Like the one for The Crucible was really awesome. And the sound work he did for the productions of Eden that he was involved in were just amazing. Christian Kasanovich's physical work on Eden in particular, like the airplane scene. Johnny Hicks and his stories about Hank Williams and Elvis. They say that the best friends you ever make in life are people you go to war with or do theater with. And my God, I had so many, still have so many friends from there. And the Dick family. Oh, no one's mentioned Spoffles, by the way, which was such a big part of the Western Stage. Jody Dick did one of my shows in New York years later, and we used to hang out. And Raleigh was such a big part of my life, both in the 80s and then the 90s, when there were two different aspects of his personality that we got to play with. So the list goes on and on.
How did the Western Stage and my career there kind of impact my life? Well, it was my life, and so I remember when we all first got to there in 87, 88. We ate, slept, breathed, spoke, dreamed the Western Stage. It was all consuming. We had 200 people come in during the summer to help us put on these theaters from all over the state, sometimes different parts of the country.
And I'll never forget, because often we would be doing shows and we'd be so amped up, like Donna was saying, just living, eating, breathing theater, that of course, after working all day on rehearsing one show and all night performing another, we wouldn't go home. We'd go to Jaime's and we'd stay up until 2 at least, talking about what we were doing in the show. It was all about the craft. And then sometimes we wouldn't be done then, and we'd go to someone's house, or we'd drive over to the beach, or we just, because we had so much to do. And I'll never forget this one night we were talking, John and I, because John was like my other big brother, who could be bossy sometimes, but I always knew he had my back. And to this day, I know that. And we were talking about theater, and he said, well, this could be it, Kelly. This could be as much money as you're ever going to make in theater. Is that worth it to you? And I thought about it, and I said, yeah. And it solidified in my mind at that moment that was true, that making theater that you were proud of, leaning in and studying what it meant to be a human being was fulfilling and meaningful and had purpose. And it wasn't about the money, I think is what he was trying to help me figure out. It was about being an artist and being a human being. And I've carried that with me ever since,
All of these opportunities were presented to us, but we had to jump in and take advantage of them. For example, the Solo Artist Project. If you didn't want to do it, don't do it. But if you're going to do it, you want to impress your friends here and this whole culture that encourages that. So I had never worked harder as an artist. I had never done more things at the same time. And it showed me that how enriching that could be.
East of Eden. It was a magnificent project. We had to do the whole book. They wouldn't let us. They wouldn't let us do the just one part of it. We had to do the whole book, and it took 9 hours to do that. 9 hours on the stage to do that, to accomplish that. And it started with workshops. It was a huge, huge undertaking because there's many, many stories there how it actually got from an embryo to a baby to a full-blown production. But I do remember the first time we did a marathon, which we used to do all 3 shows in one day. And I remember when we did that for the very first time, and that audience stuck with us all day long, with just a break for lunch and one for dinner, but they would come back and experience that 9 hours of brutal, wonderful, exhausting, exhilarating, incredible theater. And of course, at the very end, there is nothing like the feeling in that theater, in that building, that I've ever experienced before or since. The third part was not done yet, and we were doing it in front of an audience, so we had scripts in our hands. And Tom said, when you're done with your part, throw it on the floor. So as we proceeded with the third part, and at the end of that evening, the stage was littered with script pages. And then we began to sing this wonderful song at the very end of the Light of My Soul. And as we were all singing and crying, and the wonderful crew members upstairs were throwing up, and the catwalks were throwing more script papers down like snow upon us. Yeah, it raises my goosebumps even today.
I mean, East of Eden, and Donna's right, it's one of those once-in-a-lifetime kind of shows that to this very day, there are moments that I can just still see and hear clearly in my mind that resonate differently as you go through different times in your own life. Like I did the Trasks, we were always kind of we were separate from everybody. 60-person cast, and most people got to have all this fun, and they'd be reeds and the winds, and they'd be automobiles and planes. But if you were one of the Trask family, you were alone. But we got to watch all that stuff, and it was cool. And Donna is right. I mean, that the first marathon, having everyone stand up was just mind-blowing. 60 people on stage, a full band, a deconstructed piano. James Farmer and I dumped dirt all over Don Steinbeck's widow one night in part 1. And Don Dowley on the violin. And in the first production, one of my best friends, Tim McCracken, learned the accordion for it. And the scene where Sam dies and Donnie would start to play Look Down That Lonesome Road on his violin, and then Timmy would join in with the chords, and the rain would start to fall on the stage, and we'd be watching it, and we're in the show, we know what's happening. We'd all would just cry because it was so real, even though it was make-believe.
To be doing East of Eden in Salinas, obviously the connection to that at John's house, the Steinbeck house, is like 3 blocks from the theater is one thing, but the bigger with East of Eden is that the whole play takes place between Salinas, the town of Salinas itself, and the southern part of the valley. And while we were working on the show, being able to walk around town and do tours of Salinas with the buildings, a lot of the buildings are still there from that time of East of Eden. And I think for everybody that was involved in it, doing the show there in the Salinas Valley and then sitting on that stage and talking about it from all the way from Salinas, all the way down the valley to all the towns that get mentioned, was just made it just really remarkable. You couldn't do it anywhere else. I mean, there's any other production isn't going to be 3 blocks from the house that John grew up in, and within 100 miles of every place that's described in the story.
I had started writing things first as part of a radio class at the Western Stage with Taft, and my buddy Jack Halpin, who I met at the Western Stage, I had half a play written, and he said, "Oh, you should enter it in the Fringe Festival." And I did, thinking, "Oh, it'll never get in." And then it got in, so I had to finish it, and it did really well. And they had an extra performance added, and it got put into a book. And I thought, and things started to happen for me as a writer, so I just kept doing that. And actually, my first play took place in Salinas. Um, a lot of it was based on Jaime's actually, and that was really cool. And it was just so exhilarating and exciting to think of a place that was so important to me was actually doing one of my plays, and it seems surreal and bizarre in a way, but also really cool. And then they did a production of Burning the Old Man. And I think they also did a reading of a couple of scenes from April's Fool, which we then went on and did in New York, and Heather was in.
8 in California, there was a Proposition 8. There was people didn't want people of the same sex to get married, and there was a big secret hearings that people weren't allowed to go witness. You weren't allowed to film it. It's just like passing laws about our lives. And however, the transcripts from those meetings were available. So Dustin Lance Black said, hey, you know what? I'm going to make that into a play and let the people of California just know what's happening behind closed doors. And it was presented at theaters all over the state. I'm not sure of the mechanisms, but it was going to be done at the Western Stage. John Slover was going to direct it. And I was lucky enough to be called and asked to be in it. And Dustin came to see the production and put in his 2 cents on our production. You can go to all of them, but he came to the one at the Western Stage. He'd been, as I think we mentioned before, John and Peter Pan.
Melissa Woodrow at the time was working with us, and she had read about the production in New York. That was this all-star production. She messaged Lance on Facebook and said, I'm working at the Western Stage, and I haven't told the artistic director about this, but would you let us do a reading? And of course, Lance being Lance, he answered her and said, yes, absolutely. I would love for that to happen. And then we cast the show with all alums, Western Stage alums that had been working there over the years. I was just dumbfounded when Lance said he was going to come see it. And he's going to come see my interpretation of his work. What did I screw up? And he's obviously I think obviously the biggest success story of any alum we ever had. The fact that he was just a high school kid when he was in Peter Pan, and he was also in Leo's outreach show at that time too. And he talks about what the Western Stage meant to him all the time. So that's one of the most extraordinary. Just the arc of that, to have worked with Lance at that young age, and then to get to know him again and be able to do his work was just really remarkable.
Well, when we were doing Peter Pan on opening night, and the Foys came, which is really cool. We got to meet the Foys, who are famous. There's a movie, The Seven Little Foys, about them, but they were the people who originated the flying mechanism used in most productions of Peter Pan. And at the end of the first act, Peter, played by Julia Orondello, leads the Darling Children. They fly out over London. It was really cool, and they would be flying over the audience. And Lance, just in a improvisational moment of joy, took Michael's hat off. He's playing and just threw it up into the air over the audience. And everyone was like, oh, because we're all watching backstage. And Judy just flew right out just perfectly and caught it in her hand. The audience went, ah! And then she put it on her head. And the audience went, yeah! And it was insane. It was just so cool. And 700 people just screaming, ah! Because it sold out like every night. The balcony, everything was packed. And so, of course, John was like, don't try to do it again. It's never going to happen again. And Lance was like, no, I'll show them. And so every night he'd take his freaking hat off and throw it, and boom, it would land in the audience. And I use that story to this day when I'm teaching children and telling them, the moment, you can't recreate the moment. You have to be in the moment that's happening. Don't recreate last night's show.
All right, everybody. Thank you so much for sharing all those wonderful stories and for talking to me today. And I hope to see you all again soon.
Thank you, Heather.
Thank you.
Heather.
It was fantastic.
Nice to see you all.
Kelly,
Bye-bye.
So good to
John,
see everybody.
Jerry, Heather.
Unbelievable. And almost half of the stories were true.
If you like this video, be sure to follow The Western Stage on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter, or subscribe to our YouTube channel. See you next time.